Welcome to the Humble Hoof podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. A special thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Cavallo. For our Humble Hoof listeners, they are offering 15% off their Cavallo Trek hoof boots using the coupon code HRN at checkout. The Trek is the world's most popular and versatile hoof boot and Cavallo's toughest trail boot, while also doubling as an option for therapy or rehab. The front closure system makes it easily adaptable to various hoof shapes, and TPU upper design allows for maximum strength while minimizing weight for the comfort and ease of movement for your horse. These are recommended by vets and trainers and also loved as transport boots by barrel racers, show jumpers, dressage riders, and everyone in between. Again, for 15% off a pair of Treks, use the code HRN at checkout at cavallo-inc.com. If you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that I am super interested in equine nutrition and how it affects hoof health. I've seen huge progress with horses that come in here with lameness issues, poor wall quality problems, hoof sensitivity, frog health problems, all improve significantly when we really dialed in their diet. I feel like the topic of nutrition is so vast. There's so many things that we could tackle when talking about this that I want to start doing more regular episodes, just digging into it. But to start, I reached out to Mad Barn veterinarian Dr. Fran Rowe and nutritionist Dr. Priska Darani to see if they would chat with me about hoof health and nutrition in general, and a topic that is actually pretty important right now, winter laminitis. So actually, why don't we start, Priska? If you want to start, and then, Fran, you can go after of how you kind of got interested in equine nutrition.
Sure. So I actually grew up on a dairy farm in Eastern Ontario. So I was always interested in animal physiology and nutrition. So I went to the University of Guelph and did a bachelor's in animal biology, and then did a master's focused on dairy nutrition. And then for my PhD, I transitioned into looking at insulin sensitivity in general, kind of the mechanisms of insulin resistance, using rodents as a model for the human condition. And in that time, Scott Ciesler was in the same lab, also doing his graduate work. But I moved on to doing a postdoc where I continued on the path of insulin resistance and dyslipidemias, again, focused on the human. And in that time, kind of started working with Scott in terms of writing content for the website, and sort of realized that horses are also really fascinating in terms of their metabolic health and have a lot of the same kind of issues as what I'd been studying from the human perspective. And then in June of 2021, I joined Mad Barn full-time as director of research.
That's awesome. And that's really interesting. I have a whole list of questions about, obviously diet that we'll talk about today, but that's interesting that you kind of started with, not with equine, but looking at metabolic issues, because that's something that I focus on a lot with my rehab horses.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to see that, it's a similar mechanisms, but also that there's a lot of differences between humans and horses.
Yeah, awesome. And Fran?
Yeah, so I've been a horse girl my whole life. I grew up riding, and I'm from Virginia originally, and decided when I was in college that I wanted to go ahead and pursue veterinary medicine. So I ended up going straight from college into vet school at the Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. Go Hokies. And I knew immediately when I went into vet school that I was going to do horses, because that's why wouldn't I? That's so silly not to, right? So came out of vet school and did an internship, and then spent a couple of years in private practice, really just kind of getting my skills kind of honed in, and I wanted to really do the private practice job just to kind of get a good foundation in just my general skills as a practitioner. But then I back in, 2023 now, time flies, had the opportunity to join Mad Barn as a veterinary nutritionist. And I was really excited to kind of dive into this opportunity to focus more on equine nutrition, just because it has been something that I've always been interested in. And really, when I was in practice, school and in practice, recognizing just how critical good nutrition is for our, animals and horses and, our athletic horses too. So it just was the right timing for me to be able to join Mad Barn in the last couple of years. And it's been just a really wonderful experience and a fun time getting to, be nose deep in nutrition all the time.
Yeah, and I think that most people that start to look at equine nutrition realize how important it is for the health of the horse. And I know that in my career as a hoof care provider, how important it is to the health of the hoof. So, I mean, I would love to just chat a little bit about, obviously, equine nutrition today and some ways that it affects the hoof, as that's sort of the focus of the podcast and why so many people listen is hoof health. But just kind of like a general start, how are we deciding how or what we're even feeding our horses? Like, how do we decide what formulations to give them? I test my hay but I, learned that from Dr. Kellen and taking nutrition classes, but where do they start and why are we feeding our horses what we do?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, they go into the feed store and they see a feed for like senior horses or maintenance horses, and they kind of pick that feed based on the classification of their horse more so than, considering what hay they have or something like that. But from a scientific perspective, yes, the best way to do it is to take a hay sample, know the nutritional profile of it. So how much protein and energy is your horse already getting from the hay? You want your horse to be able to have access to hay at all times and kind of be very close to their requirement level for protein and energy, and not, overfeeding energy for weight gain if you don't want them to gain weight, and not underfeeding calories if you don't want them to lose weight. So really those two should be supplied well from the hay. And then we know that the hay isn't going to be providing enough of a lot of the trace nutrients. So minerals like zinc and copper, or vitamins like vitamin E. We pretty much know that across the board, those are going to be deficient in hay. And then other things will vary more by region or by the species of hay. And so the hay test will also tell you, what's the calcium level, what's the selenium level of your hay, because you can't always estimate that perfectly.
Right. So if if an owner goes into a store and they see, obviously tons of bags of feed, there's so many options, there's so many supplements on the shelves. Are these safe to just in general, like pick up and feed your horse if you can't test your hay? I know that's a question that I get a lot from owners as I, talk to them about diet and their hoof.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, I would say yes. Most of these products and feeds, whether they're kind of a concentrate product like a grain, or, our different forage-based commodities like forage cubes or beet pulp, things like that. In the vast majority of cases, yes, these products are going to be safe to feed your horse. Where we start to run into some difficulties or issues, or we need to kind of think things through a little bit more, as if we have a horse with kind of a special set of considerations. So what that might mean is horses with underlying metabolic disease. We pay really close attention to the starch and sugar content of their diet. So selecting certain products may not be appropriate for them. Maybe we have a growing horse that, is still maturing, and we need to make sure that they're getting enough protein to meet their, kind of growth requirements, and that their vitamin and mineral balance is a little bit more finely tuned. And in those cases, while the feeds you pick up off the shelf might not be horribly unsafe in these cases, there's a lot of opportunity to optimize or kind of feed that horse a more suitable diet depending on the case.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times people are surprised to hear that, at my rehab facility, I don't typically, 99% of the time I don't feed grain. But I think that testing the hay and knowing what is in the hay and allowing me to really tweak what to add to it based on that and based on obviously the individual horse, I think that's really helped me to know what I need to add and what is not necessary. And it does help that obviously in my career as a hoof care provider, a lot of the rehab cases I see tend to be metabolic. That doesn't help in the sense of like having good feet, but it helps that, most of the time I'm trying to not feed extra calories and not feed extra protein. But I will say, having those tests has been really freeing in knowing, okay, we're actually giving these horses what they need and not overfeeding them or underfeeding them, and just kind of having the actual requirements listed.
Yeah, for the most part, most horses don't need anything on top of the forage, besides like a very concentrated vitamin mineral that's not going to be adding a lot of starch and sugar or calories. So that's usually the way to go. And then you can have like a carrier like beet pulp or something like that if your horse isn't keen on a super concentrated supplement like that.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what we do. We use Speedy Beet or we have a product that we use like Timothy Balance Cubes, which is basically Timothy hay mixed with beet pulp. Yeah. And we've loved the results with it alongside the hay test. So, and obviously, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a veterinarian. I have a huge interest in this because I've seen how much feet on the horses that I work with improve based on what they're eating. So I do, I've taken nutrition courses. I've taken multiple ones with Dr. Kellen and obviously talked to nutritionists. And I know that, I'm sure you know that Scott's been on the podcast before and talked to me about nutrition. So I'm not one to be an authority on this, but I know that anecdotally, there's so many hoof care providers that can attest to the fact that supplementing copper and zinc seems to really improve hoof health. We've seen it, I've seen healthier white line. I've seen healthier wall, like the inner and outer wall. I've actually seen horses where the owner wasn't able to like soak the horse's feet for white line disease or do anything really topical, whether that was time related or the horse wasn't being compliant. And just adding copper and zinc, I've seen those white line infections really start to just grow right out with little more intervention than that. So is this something that you've seen as well? And what role does copper and zinc play in the body?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, our approach is like completely balancing the diet. So if your horse has a hoof health issue, we want to make sure the diet is fully balanced in terms of all the trace nutrients are being provided. Instead of saying like, oh, my horse has a joint health issue, so I'll feed this, or my horse has a hoof issue, so I'll feed zinc and copper. We really want to see that the diet is well balanced overall. So that means having copper and zinc provided at an optimal level, along with other nutrients that are also going to support hoof health, like biotin, methionine, those kinds of things. But certainly zinc and copper are important for hoof health. So they play a role in healthy metabolism, so supporting antioxidant defenses in the body. But they're also cofactors for enzymatic reactions. So some enzymes work better or work at their optimal rate if there's enough zinc and copper around. So one example with zinc is it's important for immune function, but also like making proteins. So the keratin that forms the strong hoof wall is a protein. So zinc helps the cells make enough of that keratin to support building healthy hooves.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I totally agree about not just isolating those two. And I know it tends to I'm tempted sometimes to be like, oh, just throw some copper and zinc at it. But yeah, absolutely. It's better to have the whole picture and see how everything functions together. So I don't mean to tell people to just, so if you're listening, out there, don't just pick one thing and toss it at your horse. But on that same kind of vein, how do you decide what forms of these minerals to put into supplements in general or to give your horse? Because, once I start getting into that, I feel like my brain explodes a little bit. There's so many different opinions on what's the best or most bioavailable. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, sure. Generally, by and large, research has really shown that providing trace minerals like zinc and copper is best done in the organic forms of these trace minerals. And what organic means, so when we talk about kind of this terminology, organic versus inorganic trace mineral sources, what that means is organic forms are when these trace minerals, that zinc or that copper, is bound to some type of molecule that contains carbon. So carbon is what equals organic in this case. And so that molecule, that carbon molecule, could be something like a protein. It could be something like an amino acid. It could be complexed with like a yeast, something like that. So you'll see them listed on ingredient lists as like chelated zinc copper or zinc copper proteinate, things like that to indicate that that's an organic source. Versus inorganic are going to be your trace mineral salts. So those are just going to be like your copper sulfates or zinc oxides, things like that. Um, and so really these, and why that really matters, the organic versus inorganic in terms of the bioavailability, is that, these different forms of trace minerals there's a couple different pathways in the body that these trace minerals are absorbed out of the gut. And many of these inorganic forms share the same absorption pathways, and you can get kind of competition between them. And one area we'll see a lot of this is diets that are really high in iron. That high iron will outcompete some of the zinc and copper absorption in the gut. And so then you can get kind of these deficiencies, even though the diet on paper looks good or looks adequate. So by utilizing these organic trace mineral sources, we're able to kind of offer some different pathways for absorption, that there's not so much competition, and that absorption capacity is just going to be a little bit better for the organic molecules. So more bioavailable. And so we, in all of our products at Mad Barn, we use all organic trace minerals to improve absorption.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, we could have I feel like I could do an entire podcast episode asking you about iron. So maybe we can chat another day about that.
Yep.
So obviously we're talking about how diets can correlate to hoof health and comfort. And right now I'm seeing a lot of posts about winter laminitis, which I know isn't necessarily diet related. For a lot of the cases that I see, it's horses that have not had any change in their diet or their management that just become really sore with the cold weather. And obviously, I have a rehab facility here. We do things like keeping their legs warm, using boots with wool socks if these horses start to, have issues. But I had learned from Dr. Kellen to use J-herb, which, please correct me if this is wrong. I've always said it as Jaugulon. I don't know if that's the way to correctly pronounce it, but I don't know if you can touch a little bit on what that is or what it's used for or why it might help these cases.
Sure, yeah. So I always say Jiagulin, but I don't know what's actually
it's
right.
Chinese, so yeah.
Yeah.
Our pronunciation might be wrong too, but J-herb, that's a good abbreviation.
Yeah, so horses that are in the cold weather, just like any other animal, will kind of work to conserve their body heat. And so one way to do that is to decrease blood flow to the extremities. And so they'll have, less blood flow going to the hooves, and instead kind of the blood flows more quickly between the arteries and the veins through these kinds of shunts that the body has. And so for some horses, like maybe they've experienced previous laminitis, so that maybe they have some damage to those vessels. And so that constriction of the blood vessels can be quite painful for them, or they're simply not getting enough oxygen or nutrients to the hoof, and that causes like an actual laminitis kind of damage to the laminae. And so the thought behind Jiagulin is that it supports nitric oxide production in the body, and nitric oxide is a vasodilator. So it kind of counteracts that natural vasoconstriction that happens in the cold. And so you're improving blood flow to the hoof to help bring more oxygen, more nutrients, and also try to help with, that pain that some horses might feel with the vasoconstriction.
Yeah, and I've seen some really good results with it. Honestly, it's surprising because it's fairly inexpensive when it comes to supplements in the grand scheme of what we give our horses. And to have it, I don't think I've seen any horse that has had no response to it at all. I feel like there's at least some kind of improvement, whether I see like, oh, their body just seems to react less to environmental allergens, whatever. I feel like there's something that is positive when I've fed it. Is there anything else that you've seen that has helped in winter laminitis cases alongside the J-herb?
I mean, there's other nutrients that are thought to support blood flow as well, or at least have been shown in other contexts. There's not, much research in the horse in terms of blood flow to the hoof, but things like arginine supporting nitric oxide synthesis as well. But in general, like those again should be added on top of a balanced diet, so that if you are, improving blood flow to the hoof, you're also ensuring that, the nutrient supply is what you want it to be for getting to the hoof and supporting healthy hoof growth and healthy metabolism in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten Alcar from Mad Barn and seen that be really helpful with some of my rehab cases that have struggled with like residual hoof pain or things that, we haven't been able to figure them out despite like testing hay, balancing minerals, trying all the other things. Is there anything that you've seen, or like, is there anything that you can speak of in terms of Alcar? I don't even remember. I'm sorry. You'll have to tell me the full name because I'm going to botch it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's acetyl L-carnitine. And there is some evidence that it supports, like, improves neuropathic pain. So if a horse has some damage to nerves, it can improve pain that way. That's kind of a separate mechanism than the typical pain of winter laminitis. But it could be, in horses that have metabolic syndrome, they might have some nerve issues. So, those horses that are getting recurrent laminitis could help with their neuropathic pain.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a horse here that has PSSM that has done well on it too, which I know that I think it might have been on a blog from you all. I'm not 100% positive, but I think that was something that was mentioned, was Alcar helping with some PSSM cases, not all, obviously, but for some of those horses, it seems to be effective.
Yeah. So the kind of Alcar has a lot of different kind of fun functions, or kind of proposed functions. There's still a lot of kind of research to be done on, all the little pathways that it can influence. But at least in the context of like horses with PSSM or recurrent exertional rhabdomyolysis, things like that, for these types of horses, when we are formulating diets for them, we want to focus on feeding a very low carbohydrate diet and then supplementing extra fat in the diet to meet calorie needs. Because for horses with PSSM, they do not store glucose in the muscles normally. That glycogen storage is dysfunctional. So what Alcar can do is help these muscle cells become more adaptable to utilizing fat as an energy source. Muscles really prefer to use glucose. That's their main energy substrate. But for these PSSM horses, we're trying to limit glucose. So we are forcing those cells to kind of adapt to using fats instead. And the Alcar can really help with that.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't realize the mechanism. I just knew that it seemed to help with these cases. And I feel like I could ask a million questions. I know that I want to be conscious of our time here. But is there anything else that owners can do or feed when it comes to hoof quality and health, or anything that you kind of want to send as like a parting advice or tips for owners that are kind of looking to improve their horse's health through nutrition?
Yeah. So, I think the one thing I really like to remind horse owners is that, yes, nutrition is very important when it comes to hoof health, but it's just one factor. We can't forget that, environmental kind of conditions, genetics, and exercise load or terrain, things like that are all going to also play kind of key roles in hoof health. So, don't pigeonhole yourself into just thinking of nutrition, or if you're not seeing the results that you're hoping for, and yet you have a good diet on, for your horse, don't forget about the other things that can really influence. But, when it comes to nutrition, in addition to, ensuring that your horse is getting a really well-balanced diet, meeting vitamin and mineral needs, especially those nutrients that are important for hoof health, I think a big thing that I am always a proponent of is kind of staying proactive with monitoring your horse's metabolic health. So, it can sneak up on you a little bit, especially if, you have horses that maybe aren't in as much exercise, or they're easier keepers. Maybe they're getting a little bit chunky monkey, you know, kind of that insulin dysregulation and metabolic disease can sneak up on you a little bit. So being vigilant about those sorts of things and staying on top of insulin testing and blood work can really help you catch these horses earlier, before they have a fulminant laminitis episode, so that you can make interventions more quickly and sooner into that disease process. And then, if you do have a horse with metabolic disease, making strides to improve insulin sensitivity outside of diet with things like exercise and caloric balance and things like that can be really helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. The horse and your farrier will be happier.
Yes. Yes. And your vet. And
right.
Your vet.
Right. Awesome. Priska, did you have any last minute advice?
I would say if you're interested in nutrition, whether you're a farrier or a horse owner, we've launched an introductory nutrition course. So Introduction to Equine Nutrition, targeted to horse owners or anyone that's curious about nutrition. So we'd love to have, as many people as possible check that out and give us your feedback on the course material and the course structure and everything.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. And that's something that it's available for free right now, right?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and it will remain free.
That's awesome. And where is that? How can owners or anybody find that?
So it's on the website. And if you go just to our main page on the top, kind of right-hand side, there's a couple tabs, and you'll go under the Learn tab. And then that drop-down menu, you'll see Nutrition Course. It's the second option on the drop-down there. And then that will take you to the course registration. It's completely free. The only thing you have to do is just set up an account with Mad Barn.
Awesome.
And then you are automatically registered. And then you can go through it on your own time. There's no time limit. Go through it as slowly as you want. And there are five modules, Priska. Is that correct? Yeah, 5.
That's great. And did I hear that it's going to be eligible for CE credits? Or
We're
is that
doing CE credits separately for vets right now? So that's a separate portal that vets can enter. But this is currently not for CE credits.
Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of really great educational opportunities coming down the pipeline from Mad Barn, which is really amazing. I absolutely love that. Since I first met Scott, I've been really impressed by his commitment to education and really, kind of bettering things for the horse and the owner. So thank you so much for all you guys do and for being willing to chat with me on this. And if you're willing, I would love to have you guys back on to talk about other aspects of nutrition or, do something semi-regularly to chat about these topics, because I think it's something that's so important. I know that obviously, as Fran said, there's so many factors of what affects hoof health, but I really truly think that I can't grow a healthy hoof unless the diet is in place alongside all those other factors. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being willing to chat with me.
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad this worked out. It was good. It was a good break in the day. I think we're also supposed to plug for listeners of the podcast. If they put in the discount code The Humble Hoof at checkout, you'll get 5% off your order through Mad Barn.
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, and you can always reach our vets as well if you have any questions. So our vets, Fran and Dr. Cullen, you can reach them at vet@madbarn.com.
Great. And I know that Mad Barn does offer, I don't want to say this wrong, but it is free, right? You offer free balancing or looking over diets of horses.
Yep, exactly. So same thing, if you go to the website and you look at that top right-hand kind of corner, there's an analyze diet button, and there's just an online form that'll prompt you through submitting your horse's current diet and their kind of demographic information. And then that gets sent to one of our nutritionists who will take a look and then follow up with recommendations via email.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is great. And I know there's so much more information that we can talk about. So hopefully we can connect again and pick some more topics to explore.
Absolutely.
That'll be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And especially for jumping on this call last minute. That was so great.
Yeah. Sounds good. Good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks,
you, Lisa.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.